Welcome to the Away Yet Close podcast. Meet your host, Lamia.
And Mandy, expats like you, here to guide you through the food and body image challenges you might encounter as you settle into a new country.
Get ready to explore, eat, empower, no matter where you are in the world. Ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Away Yet Close podcast.
Yeah, it's great to be again here with you. And today we are diving into a topic that resonates well with many of us, especially expats, which is about navigating emotional eating during transitions and challenging situations.
Yes, for sure, emotional eating is something that we all experience at some point in our lives. And especially when you are going through a big life change, like moving to a new country, it can be particularly challenging, and emotional eating can be a way to deal with this distress. So, today in this episode, we want to share our personal stories. We want to explore also why we turn to food for comfort, and we want to give you some practical tips so that you can manage your emotional eating.
Yeah, exactly. But first, let's start with defining what is emotional eating. So, emotional eating is when we use food to cope with emotions instead of satisfying the physical hunger. It's a way of soothing ourselves, but it can often lead to guilt, shame, and further emotional distress.
Right. Yes. And it's very important to understand that it is something very common. It's a very common response to stress. And especially when facing major transitions like moving abroad, all the stress and uncertainty it brings to be in this unfamiliar environment can trigger this emotional eating. For example, when I first moved to the Netherlands back in 2017 to study my master, I remember I did struggle a lot with emotional eating, especially during the exam period. I remember a friend from Mexico had sent me a package of these spicy candies that it was not possible at the time to find in Maastricht, where I was studying. And one day that I was studying and really anxious, I just ate them all in one go. And of course, that was not very nice for my stomach. I did have some stomach problems afterwards, and then this also impact my sleep because I couldn't sleep very well. So yeah, I struggled with this at the time.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that and how we can relate to food and maybe that's a piece from home, these spicy candies that you got and you ate all of them in one go. That's completely something that I can relate to it. So for me also, when I moved from Tunisia to France, it was a cultural shift for me, and I felt a bit lonely, overwhelmed, and the bakeries around in France didn't help. So I started eating a lot of pastry, just not because they were delicious, but because also they reminded me the comfort and warmth of home. And it was not just the pastries. I also found myself indulging in a lot of chocolate because it was available, sometimes eating like what you said, one package of chocolate in one go, and that happened so many times. I remember it provided me a momentary escape from the challenges that I was facing. It wasn't just a taste, but the memories that evoked. I was like happier, more memories, more stable times, and that's like a way for me to deal with my homesickness. But this kind of pastries, it reminds me of home. Like we had this kind of pastries, or similar, not exactly what we have in France, but is a bit related, that we could use for breakfast, for coffee break, for any kind of special occasion. So for me, it was going to something familiar to soothe myself, to feel and deal with my homesickness and the stress of adjusting to my new life, to my student life. And especially that moment, it was the first time that I was living by myself. So that was the thing that I did to deal with my stress of adapting.
Yes, no, for sure. There's something really comforting about these familiar foods, these familiar tastes, and especially when we are in a very unfamiliar and foreign place, this can really soothe this emotional void in that moment. And for sure, like you mentioned, also chocolate is very common comfort food for many of us. And it's really amazing how food that is not really about the food, but is how these certain foods can really bring us back to some memories, to some nice memories, and especially when we are dealing with a lot of stress and emotional distress. Our brain just wants to feel good in the moment, and we are not really aware, we are not really present, and we just find like a solution that for a moment will bring us that relief.
Yeah, exactly. In that relief, we look for the comfort in a familiar taste. So for me, it was also not just, for example, when I moved to France, but also when I moved to the Netherlands, I was looking for that familiar taste that even if the food culture changed in the Netherlands, I was looking into where to find that familiar food and found the stroop waffles, which is like waffles with caramel in it, which brought me a bit the taste of home. So I was falling again in a similar pattern, using these foods that I found out to cope with my continued stress and my homesickness. So in general, like these chocolate and pastries, either in different countries, they were still there and they were comforting, and that's what I was looking for.
Yes, no, for sure. I can also identify with this because after my master, I went back to Mexico, but I came back 2 years ago to live in Amsterdam. And I also found comfort in some Dutch treats, like for example, these butter cookies. They're called rum butter in Dutch. And actually, it's funny because this reminded me of my good times in the Netherlands when I did my master. So then the comfort food was coming from my expat experience in this country. So it's interesting how we relate to these memories, to these good memories with the food, and how in these moments this food represents this comfort and this sense of home or this sense of being okay, especially when we are in the new unfamiliar place. So this familiar food give us this temporary sense of security.
Yeah, exactly. So we are looking for the security, the sense of security that this food brings, or even the sense of safety that we are safe now in that moment. So we go to this food that we know or we relate to or brings us peace from home. It's kind of bringing a piece of home that we can carry all the time with us, even if everything is changing and everything is challenging. But it's important to recognize when these comforting habits start to become patterns that may not serve us well in the long run.
Yes, exactly, because it's of course this food can bring us comfort and there's nothing wrong with consuming them, but we need to become aware when it starts to become a pattern, and a pattern that is harmful for our well-being or that is not really helpful. For example, for me, I think the turning point was when we go back to this example of eating these spicy candies all in one go in my exam period, where I started to have these stomach issues and that they started also to affect my sleep. So I was already dealing with the stress of that. I then was not feeling well physically, and then I was not resting very well because this also affected my sleep. So this is the important part that we really recognize when we are just trying to fill an emotional void with strategies that are not very helpful for us.
Yeah, it's nice to realize that what happens when you indulge in this kind of food. So you felt this pain in your stomach. You felt that you have less sleep, and that's nice, and that's very important realization. So we can learn from it and we can move forward with it. And to help with that, also, we can provide some practical strategies to manage emotional eating. So one of the first steps is to develop awareness. So that's what you are doing. You developed awareness of what happens to your body when you realize that you were emotionally eating. So by starting with noticing when you are eating for emotional reasons, we can ask ourselves, are you truly hungry, or are you eating because you are stressed, bored, or lonely?
Yes, no, for sure. Yeah, because during those moments, my brain was just with rushing thoughts about the things I needed to do and know for the exams. And I was really disconnected. I was disconnected from my body, from my hungry signals that for sure, if I would have noticed them, my body was like, okay, this is enough. You are you are full. But I just went completely to ignore them. And that's why it's very important that we can track this. And a way to do this, as we mentioned also in our previous episode, is with a food and mood journal. So in this journal, you can write down what you ate, when you ate it, and how you were feeling at that time. So this can help you to identify patterns and also understand what are the triggers for your emotional eating. And we will provide a tool that can help you to make this journal, and you can find it also in the show notes of these episodes.
Yeah, that's nice to have this journal to help us to figure out what is the triggers of our emotional eating. And I can add also that emotional eating can be a gift because then you understand what's happening. You understand the emotions behind it and you understand what you can do with that. And that's very helpful to be aware of that and recognize that. So, another strategy would be also to find alternative ways to cope with your emotions. So, for example, for me, when I was feeling homesick in France, I started exploring the city and taking long walks to distract myself or to lift up my mood. It also helped me to focus on other things than food. When I also moved to the Netherlands, one of my friends introduced me to coloring of mandalas, and it was really helpful for me to use that to like de-stress myself, and I still keep doing that, and it's very nice way to cope with my emotions, especially when I'm stressed.
Yes, wow, that sounds like a very a very nice and fun strategy. In my case, for me, when I was doing my master, what really helped me too was to connect with other people. So I joined the bouldering club and I also joined the swimming club. So in this way, I was also moving my body, doing some physical exercise, which helped me release also this stress, but at the same time, connecting with new people, making new friends. And this also gave me the emotional support I needed to deal with this emotional distress.
Yeah, it's nice that you join this kind of activities to cope with your stress and maybe make new friends also by the end. And yeah, that's also helpful. And another important aspect is to also practice mindfulness. We were talking last episode about mindful eating, and we can say again, so before you eat, take a moment to check in with yourself, ask yourself, am I truly hungry, or am I eating to cope with an emotion? If it's the latter, try to address the emotion directly. This may mean taking a walk or meditating or journaling or talking to a friend. So if you want to hear more about mindful eating, please check the previous episode and also check in the show note. We have a journal on mindful eating that would help you also with this journey and ask you some of the questions that are important here.
Yes, for sure. This is a very important tool to stay connected to ourselves, to our bodies, to our emotional needs too. So thank you for mentioning it, Lamia. And also, I would like to say that we shouldn't forget how important it is to be self-compassionate because it's very easy to beat ourselves for emotional eating, to criticize ourselves, but we need to understand that we are all humans, that we are not perfect, and that this is a very common response to stress. So you are already dealing with the struggle of the stress, and if you add this critical self, these critical thoughts, then it's make it worse. So it's very important to recognize, be aware where it's coming from, notice without judgment with the strategies we mentioned that is maybe not the best way to deal with this, is maybe not the most helpful way, but being kind to yourself and recognizing that it's okay to have these moments can help us to move forward and find healthier ways to cope with it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely true. So you can hear us talking always about self-compassion because we believe that's very important and something that we need to practice, whatever it's coming to food or it's coming to body image. And it's something that we really believe in it, that will be helpful, that will be in all situations important to think about and be self-compassionate. And emotional eating is a journey and it's one that we all navigate differently. So it's not the same that how I navigate it, it's not the same how Mandy is navigating it, but we need to develop awareness to find alternative coping strategies and to practice self-compassion so we can manage the emotional eating in another way. And it's okay also if sometimes you eat for emotional reasons. There is no like harm in that, but just to stay focused and think about, okay, is it the healthier way for me, or do I need to think about other coping strategies?
Yes, for sure. And we hope that these tips we gave here and that our personal stories can help you feel less alone in this journey. And remember that it's all about finding balance, not perfection. And it's very important to keep being kind to yourself during this transition period.
Yeah, exactly. And if you have any questions or you want to share your own experiences with emotional eating and how it affects you, feel free to reach to us on social media or via email. We love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you for joining us today and see you next time. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Await Yet Close podcast.
Whether you are on the other side of the world or just navigating your own food and life journey, remember you're not alone.
If you enjoy what you heard, like, subscribe, and review us.
See you next time.